Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Jon Ferro, along with Lisa Abramowicz and Anne-Marie Hordern. Join us each day for insight from the best in markets, economics and geopolitics. From our global headquarters in New York City, we are live on Bloomberg Television weekday mornings from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify or anywhere else you listen. And as always, on the Bloomberg Terminal and the Bloomberg Business app. We begin with our top story. Stocks hitting fresh record highs as investors await Fed Chair Jay Powell's testimony. Academy's Peter Tchir writing this. We have argued quite aggressively that the Fed should make their first cut in July, partly because the economic data supports it, but also taking the spotlight off of the Fed in the heat of the election. Peter joins us now for more. Pete, good morning.
Morning.
Two reasons. One's about the economy. The second is about the politics. So let's start with the second one. The politics. Why is that an important consideration for this Federal Reserve?
Well, I'm going to start with the first one, but basically every guest has been on saying September looks likely. They should be doing it. They should be acting sooner than later. I completely agree. And if anything, I would err to the side that they do it in July. If you do this in September, I just envision a world where this is going to blow up in social media. Clearly, if they cut in September, say stocks rally 3-5%, you will see the Trump campaign aggressively go after the Fed, blame them for playing favorites. It won't be the case, but the reality doesn't mean anything anymore, right? It's how these things play out in the social media narrative is what's important. You do the first cut in July, you'll get some flack, but it's July 31st. No one cares, it'll quiet down, and you can move on, and you set up a September rate cut, I think, much easier. That's how I would play it. You know, maybe you're not supposed to think that way, but to me, it makes the most sense.
We've drawn a distinction repeatedly this morning between what they should do and what they will do. This is what you think they should do. What do you think they will do, and what do you expect to hear today from Chairman Powell this morning?
I think they're going to set us up for September. I think they're going to continue to look at the data. I think the data is going to come in weak. I'm hopeful that CPI comes in low enough. Maybe it lets them squeeze towards July, but I think it's already too late with the messaging. So I think we get that September cut, 25 then, another 25 in November, and then 25 in December. So we get 75 this year.
Some people would say that just because the Fed has even signaled the cut, we've already gotten the easing in financial conditions that have given a shot of stimulus to the economy. Why is that not the case as we have just experienced the 35th record high of this year?
Well, so for example, I just pulled up the equal weighted S&P, which month to date is down 0.2%. Year to date is up 3.5%. So this market has been very narrow rally, right? It's really all about AI, the AI story, this transitional. So I don't think we should set policy based on the excitement over AI, right? If AI is real, it might still be undervalued. So when you look at the broad market, you know, the Russell 2000 still done poorly, value stocks. So I think we get caught up in the broad indices. You look below the surface, markets are only doing okay. I think the job data is turning. It's turning fairly quickly. And with inflation around 2.8% or somewhere in that neighborhood, you don't want to risk a recession. Back when we were 5%, the Fed could afford to risk a recession, right? Inflation was so bad, so painful, they could do that. Now there's no reason to create a recession. So all those reasons tell me cut now, even if financial conditions look pretty decent. And what I've liked in the last week or so, 2s, 10s is widening. And I do think one thing people are going to find mistaken this time is even as the Fed cuts, I don't think 10s and 30s are going to respond that much. I think 10s and 30s are going to focus on the deficit, the supply, and you're going to see 2s, 10s go back to zero, maybe slightly, even uninverted over time, and you're going to see that 430 to 450 range on 10s hold, even when the Fed begins cutting rates.
There's a lot to unpack there. Let's go to the deficit. I am curious about how much the politics of the moment. You guys are laughing at me. No, I'm serious, because this is something that people talk about. We just had Kelsey Barrow on saying, buy the 10-year. I know you guys are laughing at my obsession. It is important at a time, especially when you have all of the bond auctions this week. How much are you looking at that as something that sort of takes away the opportunity to really buy into weakness?
So, I think that's why yields are going to stay somewhat high, stubbornly high at the long end. It comes up in conversation after conversation. And what I try and bring back is, if you remember August and September last year, where treasuries were for sale every single day, I think we went from 4% to 5%. No matter what the data was, maybe we'd rally briefly, treasuries would go for sale. There was a huge fixation on the deficit, our willingness to kind of talk about not paying, you're going to see episodes of that. It's not going to be nonstop. It's not consistent, right? Because this deficit's going to take time. But I would expect every year or so you get that sort of noise. Even earlier this year, right? We went from 390 to 470. Same sort of trend. So I think more and more you're going to see these breaks to the upside on yields because people fixate on the deficit, and neither party is going to change that.
But you don't buy those dips in price.
Not until we get high enough in that range, because I think everyone's comfortable with treasuries right now. I think people position too long. So down here at 430, I'm selling treasuries. Maybe they go to 420. I think we get back to 450 before long, even with the Fed cutting. I think that's going to be the realization is, yeah, whatever the Fed's doing at the front end is great, but it doesn't solve the deficit problem. It doesn't solve our long-term debt problems. And this overall supply is still real. So that's why I'm not that comfortable with the long end.
Can we go back to the optics, the political optics of the September cut? Take that a step further. It's not just going to be that the Trump campaign would come out and maybe say, they're in the tank for President Biden. If Trump is elected, does this give him the excuse with his own party to go back to that Wall Street Journal report, which is that they want to blunt the independence of the Fed?
Yeah, I think over the last year or so, right, there's a lot more both from Trump and others talking about the Fed's independence, questioning, Congress, what Congress says over the Fed. I think if they cut in September, it leaves them much more open to, under a new administration, attack about what their mandate is, whether they have to be rule followers, how much flexibility they have. Again, I think all of that may play out one way or the other. I think it's less likely if they do this in July. And again, the data is there for them to think about cutting. And you would argue, right, I think other people there's this lag effect. Why not get a couple cuts in earlier? I just feel it would be very prudent and better for the Fed's long-term health and independence to get something done sooner than later.
And does he need to signal that today?
I think he should be pretty strong about if we get good enough data in the coming weeks, we could cut sooner. And that kind of gives him a little bit of, like CPI, I think will actually be a miss. So it'll be lower than expected. So I don't know whether that's now a miss or a win anymore, and however we want to interpret it. But I think we'll get a lower CPI. Any problems with CPI will either be one-off things explainable, or they'll be housing related, which everyone now knows is lagged effect. It's one reason the Fed looks at PCE, and I've been learning more and more about this, but supposedly it would take an act of Congress to change how CPI uses that, which is why people go to CP. You look at anything like Zillow or anything that's kind of contemporaneous rent, rents come way down, so it's artificially inflated. I think those are the things that give him the leeway between the jobs report and that to put July on the table.
Kelsey Berrow was with us about 10, 15 minutes ago, and she really drew a distinction between cutting interest rates to fine-tune policy in response to disinflation and cutting interest rates in response to a much weaker labour market. Now, I said that there were bearish rate cuts and bullish rate cuts. I'd actually like your opinion on that. Do bearish rate cuts exist? Are there rate cuts that are bearish for this market?
I think it's all relative what's been priced in. So right now, I think, if we had a really, steep drop in employment, then we get a bearish rate cut, and maybe equities couldn't keep up and couldn't keep going. But as it stands right now, I think everything's going to be really positive. I think we're all sitting there trying to watch what triggers this breakout, though, of the Russell 2000, the value, the equal weighted versus, that still to me isn't clear, right? It feels to me we've been on this path where the data is good enough, you should see the broad economy doing well. Yeah. The Fed's accommodating enough, you should do that, and those still aren't working.
We all remember November 2016, and we've talked about this a few times. Small caps rallied almost 11% in November 2016 on the Trump election. I think the question we've all gone back to around the table in the last couple of weeks is just how relevant that playbook is this time around. Is it relevant at all?
I'm kind of ignoring most of the election stuff. I think, one, it's too clear what's going to go on, who's going to be even representing, and I think we see time and time again, right? Whatever they say they're going to do, the policies wind up coming much more narrow. I've been a big fan of Mexico recently, right? There was a lot of concern after the Mexican elections that it would change. You saw the Mexican pace. All that's coming back to normal, right? Whatever you say to get elected and whatever you wind up doing tend to be two very different things. So I'm paying very little attention to any of the rhetoric. And I would say, on top of all of it feels that people are very willing to put their own interpretations on it. So if you're
hold up. If we get politically induced dislocations in the markets through this summer, you're a buyer. You take the other side.
I am generally a buyer, yes.
That's exactly what Kelsey Berrow said 10 minutes ago.
Even though her sense of what to buy was somewhat different. So that's, I guess, my question to you. What are you a buyer of during these dislocations?
So the one thing I would say maybe slightly different is I do like energy. And I would say when you look at the world right now, you've got Putin, dictator, Xi, dictator, Kim, dictator, Helane, effectively a dictator. They have to be looking at what's going on here, and they probably don't understand our political system, but they see the leader of the free world, the commander-in-chief, internally focused, facing all these questions. I think the risk that someone takes some action and tries to take advantage of that over the summer is much higher. So I am looking for the potential for a geopolitical risk. That I would not fade, and that's why I kind of want to own commodities ahead of that. I think almost anything that gets done would affect energy prices in particular. And on top of that, not quite even in that same vein, we're sitting here, all this internal focus. Oban's traveling to Russia, right? Putin and Modi met. The rest of the world's moving on while we're internally focused. That I don't like for the future.
I've got to squeeze this in. You're surrounded by generals at Academy. You just said take advantage. What does taking advantage look like? What does that mean?
I think if you watch what's going on, right, the last time we did funding for Ukraine, right, a lot of this plays out in social media, how difficult that was to get over the hurdle. You watch what's been going on with Israel and Gaza, where we're supposed to support, what we're not supposed to do, a lot, again, plays out in social media. So we're having a lot of activity around the Second Thomas Shoal in the Philippines, a couple hundred miles off the coast of Philippines. Would anyone really care? What would we do if something like that? So I think we're already stretched. We have, we're engaged in 2 wars. Neither of those are going smoothly, certainly by any stretch of the imagination. So do you push the envelope? Do you do something different? I think China could do something. Maybe, North Korea's been extremely quiet. Do you get weapon sales? Something to just shake it up where they view that, 1, we're stretched, 2, they can use misinformation, social media to push against us, and the time frame is right for that, where we already had enough questions without their misinformation.
Pete, we could do this all hour. It's good to see you. I know you've got to go. Peter Tchir there of Academy Securities. Democratic donor Trey Beck saying he would like to see Biden drop out. Trey, I'm pleased to say, joins us now. Trey, wonderful to catch up with you, sir. For people in the audience who aren't familiar with you, can you just share with us how you've supported Democratic causes, this president, in years gone by, and what changed for you 2 Thursdays ago?
So I've been a defender of President Biden as, first of all, his presidency. I think by any objective measure, he's done an extraordinary job. He has passed 2 infrastructure bills, one of them bipartisan, CHIPS bill, prescription drugs, addressing, real issues for Americans. And I think on a sort of degree of difficulty adjusted basis, if you consider he's facing an incredibly hostile opposition, one that in many cases doesn't even recognize the legitimacy of his clear win in 2020, right? Those are the conditions in which he's operating. I think he can make a case he's the best Democratic president of my lifetime in terms of what he has accomplished. I supported him in 2020. I supported him again in this cycle. And to be clear, however this resolves, I will support him or whoever the Democratic nominee is. And I think that's an important note. I think whatever happens with this inter-family squabble, we're going to have to unify around our candidate. And if that's Biden, I will get behind him. I'll walk on glass for the guy. What's changed is that the debate confirmed, the concerns that I think everybody had. And I think most notably voters. I think the Biden campaign has very understandably come out and shrewdly attacked this as sort of a cabal led by elites or donors, millionaires, in that quote you just showed. If I were them, that's what I'd say too. But I think what's actually happening here is that, in a sense, donors and the electeds who've come out, and I've talked to electeds privately who share their concerns and would like a change, but are not there yet to do it publicly, and I understand some of the calculations there. I think what's happening is people are coming around to exactly the view that voters have been expressing through polls for a year. I think that's what's going on. And so I think that what the debate confirmed, and for that matter, the radio interview he did and the Stephanopoulos interview, they have confirmed the degree of impairment from age. So it's true, everyone knew that, this was an 81-year-old man running for president, and that's hard. What we were hoping for was that he was anomalous and that he would have the stamina and acuity to do this. And I think what a lot of people are saying now is we need a candidate who can express who can make the case, with the vigor that this moment deserves, given the authoritarian threat that we face in Trump and the administration that he would install.
Trey, is the concern with you and the people you're speaking with about Biden winning in November or Biden's ability to govern for the next 4 years?
I think the two are related, right? So historically, Biden has represented a vote for safety. In 2020, he was, old by the standards of somebody running for president, but he was considered establishment. He was coherent. He was not saying crazy things and threatening authoritarian policies like the alternative, which was Donald Trump. I think what some voters are struggling with now is they already know Trump is a bad guy. They know he lies. They know he's literally a criminal. He's a convicted criminal. They know he is threatening policy implementation that they don't agree with, whether it's reproductive rights, firing, much of the civil service and installing loyalists, using the judiciary to punish people. But they're struggling with this because they now see a less vigorous Joe Biden. And I don't blame Joe Biden for this. I believe that the Biden campaign, when they greenlit this campaign, had a different candidate. And I think what we've seen is significant impairment. I'm not a doctor, but I saw what I saw, and others saw what they saw. And we need somebody to make the case during the campaign. And then, of course, should we win, and I fervently hope we do, we want someone with the vigor to do one of the hardest jobs in the world. Now, I want to make clear, I don't have any substantive concerns about Biden's age. You're not electing one person, you're electing a team in my mind, and many, many people I know understand this. You're talking about an army of bureaucrats, high and low. And I know the team that Trump is assembling. I know what he assembled previously, and what he's talking about doing now is worse and frightening. And I know that Biden is surrounded by hyper-competent people handling things domestically and abroad. But, the way most voters see it is they see two names on the ballot, or in this case, maybe 3 or 4, depending on the state they live in.
But Trey, didn't his team around him do the American people a disservice by hiding a lot of these issues that they have over the past few months that we saw out full display for 90 minutes on CNN 2 Thursdays ago?
A lot of people are making that case. I don't know what the campaign sees. I don't know what his staff sees on a day-to-day basis. I'm not here to make that sort of allegation, of a cover-up. What I'll say is we did see what we saw. I think we've seen things previously, and people rightly say, well, haven't there been signs of decline or physical impairment, slower gait, et cetera, prior to the debate? Absolutely. But I think what we were hoping was that those were anomalous. And I think when we saw on the biggest stage the performance we saw, it confirmed a lot of people's concerns.
Yeah, well, Trey, there's also this issue of whether Joe Biden is currently operating at the same playbook, with the same playbook, in some ways that Donald Trump is, by just simply coming out and being defiant and saying, people get in line.
Yeah, so on the one hand, I do find that dispiriting that, he's describing everyone as either a cabal of elites or, acting in bad faith. On the other hand, the positive of that is he's fighting, and he's showing the sort of scrappy Joe that got him elected. His campaign has clearly mobilized and forced to, enlist allies. Now, a lot has been made of those allies and saying, well, look, the labor movement, people of color who are historically, critical to his political power are lining up behind him. I think that's a very, good political line of attack by them, but I don't think it's substantively true. I think what you've seen is elites from those, labor union leaders lining up behind them. And by the way, privately, labor union leaders have expressed grave concerns to me. I've also, I can cite any number of polls that show that people of color are deeply concerned about Biden's age. Something like 64% of all voters would like Biden replaced on the ticket, and that includes 55% of black voters. So I think it's substantively not true that the average person of color who's a voter has no concerns at all about Biden's age.
Trey, appreciate your input today. We're going to have to do this again soon. Trey Beck there,
Thank you.
The Democratic donor, on the latest with the president. How much things changed for him 2 Thursdays ago. Sticking with travel, the TSA screening more than 3 million people on Sunday. Rounding out the July 4th holiday weekend, it's the first time that many passengers have been screened in a single day in the agency's history. 8 of the 10 busiest screening days have come this year as travel demand tops pre-pandemic levels. To discuss this and a whole lot more, Helane Becker of TD Cowen joins us. Helane, let's talk about this super busy weekend at a time when Boeing is struggling to build planes and United Airlines, at least their jets, are struggling to hold on to the wheels. Helane, I'm just wondering if things too busy.
Yeah, thanks for the question, John. Yeah, I mean, we've never seen these kind of travel levels before. The system has proven that it really is having a hard time handling it, especially when there's bad weather and we have huge delays and so on. It just cascades down through the entire network. And so you're seeing bigger planes in general rather than more service because there's only so much that can be done. And we don't often, you and me and Lisa and the team, we always talk about airline traffic. We don't talk about what's happening at the airports. And the airports are having their own issues with lack of parking, with the lack of, in some cases, lack of food options, and lack of seating, especially at some of the older airports where people, are asked to come early and then they have to wait. There's no charging stations in a lot of older airports. The charging stations in newer airports don't work. So, there's this whole ecosystem that was built around a smaller level of population that travels. And now we're seeing so many people travel on a regular basis. To your point, 8 of the 10 busiest days have been this year, and most of them have been in the last 6 weeks.
So do you think that, Helane, this is introducing a problem that is would have been the case even pre-pandemic, or do you think that it's been exacerbated to a big degree because the personnel just isn't there after a lot of the layoffs in 2020, in 2021 that have left a lot of senior people no longer in the workforce?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is yes. I think this level of travel was coming anyway because you have an aging population and you have a lot of people who have more time to travel and they're doing so, right? They're doing a lot of bucket list trips and so on. So you're seeing this huge increase in international travel. For younger people, they got used to traveling with their parents and they want to continue to travel with their own families. So you're seeing a lot of that. But to your point, we were expecting those kind of travel numbers maybe a little bit later in the decade, not so much now. And also all of those people who left, whether they were furloughed or they chose early retirement or they chose other careers, in the 2020 to, let's say, 21, mid-2022 timeframe, the people who have come in to replace them are less experienced. The FAA says we're short about 3,000 air traffic controllers. Congress approved the new budget, which allows for the hiring of more. It also allows a path for those who have been air traffic controllers in the military to come into the network without going through the entire FAA training academy. So there is a way to increase that. But at the busiest airports, the pay scales are still relatively low. So people don't want to do that career. They don't want that job because they have to live within, I think, an hour and a half of their base. It's very expensive to live in the New York area. It's very expensive to live in Chicago area, San Francisco. And so people don't want those jobs. And the result is that we have this limitation on how much capacity can grow, which is should eventually be good for airlines because they should make more money. But for travelers, it means they have to pay more for airline tickets.
Could we talk about what happened yesterday with United, the most recent mishap when it comes to losing its wheel? And John asked the question earlier that was the right one. Do you think this is a United issue or do you think this is a Boeing issue?
I think it's an issue. I think it's more of a supply chain issue. And I think in this case, it was probably a United issue, not a Boeing issue. Aircraft come out of maintenance. They have to be double checked, triple checked before they go back on the line. This was a case of a wheel falling off. This is not obviously the first time United has had an issue. I don't want to disparage them because they're a safe airline. I fly them a lot. You guys probably fly them a fair amount being in the New York area. So I don't want to say negative things about them, but yeah, I mean, every airline can be good or bad on any given day, and they're just having this issue. And for them, this was a 757, I think, that you're talking about, and that's an older plane that's been around for a very long time with a really good safety record.
Helane, what do you like right now in the airline sector? Everyone seems to love Delta. Terminal 4 is a mess, just to throw that out again. Helane, what do you like in the airline sector right now?
Well, Delta actually was our top pick for 2024, so getting thrown under the bus there. But I think from a balance sheet perspective, from a traffic perspective, growth, opportunity, their big advantage is that only pilots are unionized on property. Everybody else is not union, so they have the ability to make adjustments without going through an entire big process. Unlike the other airlines, if they want to make adjustments, they have to go through the unions. So Delta was our top pick for 2024. I think it still continues to be. We also have buys on United and Alaska Air as other ideas. Copa. I've talked to you guys a lot about Copa in the past. It's one of our favorite names in the mid-cap airline sector. So I think those would be our top 4 or 5.
Helane, thanks for jumping on for us. Appreciate it. Helane Becker there of TD Cowen.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in markets, economics and geopolitics. You can watch the show live on Bloomberg TV weekday mornings from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify or anywhere else you listen. And as always, on the Bloomberg Terminal and the Bloomberg Business app.